Family, this is your favorite queer radio personality, Anna Deshawn, and this is Queer News, your favorite weekly news pod where race and sexuality meet politics, culture, and entertainment. This is your number one stop for queer news done right, only on E3 Radio. Today, we're dropping a special episode brought to us by our queer news contributor, Darian Aaron, Senior Director of Local News U.S. South for GLAAD. This episode digs into GLAAD's newly released 2026 HIV Stigma Report with a powerful intergenerational conversation taking root down south. Now, while Gen Z is the most out generation in history, GLAAD's latest report reveals a wild knowledge gap. Family, only 31% of Gen Z feel knowledgeable about HIV, compared to 60% of Gen X. To bridge this divide, Darian Aaron brought 4 generations of Black Southerners, baby boomers, Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z gathered at the ArtsXchange in East Point, Georgia, to put real faces, history, and radical honesty behind the data. Darian was joined by Jerrell, Associate Director of Education and Advocacy at GLAAD, and author of the report, alongside Black Southern advocates to unpack what it takes to break historic silos and the stigma. They discuss the systematic failures of sexual health education, the promise of modern prevention like PrEP, and why sharing stories of thriving, joyful lives today is the ultimate antidote to lingering epidemic-era shame. As GLAAD CEO Sarah Kate Ellis notes in the report, ending HIV stigma is possible, but it will require all of us to choose truth over misinformation, visibility over silence, and empathy over fear. You can follow GLAAD online at GLAAD, GLAAD, and learn more about this report or read the report in full for yourself, okay? At GLAAD.org. It's right at the top. We want to thank Darian for bringing this story to Queer News, okay? And as an extra bonus, Darian has written a piece on our Substack as well, so go check that out. I love how Substack is allowing for deeper engagement and storytelling in this moment. You aren't just getting audio anymore, you're getting a written word too, and I love that for us. And if you haven't joined the Substack yet, why not? It's our weekly newsletter, but it also houses our lists, our guides, and special episodes. I'm being able to write more, right, and share more, and that feels good. Queer News is not just a podcast anymore. It feels like we're really building a community of folks who care about our humanity and who want to remain informed. A link to join the Substack is in the show notes, of course, but come on now, queernewspod.substack.com. queernewspod.substack.com. Join the movement, okay? Now, Darian, over to you, my friend.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out of your evening to join what I believe will be a thoughtful discussion about the impact of HIV on the lives of Black people in the South, ahead of the release of GLAAD's 6th annual HIV Stigma Report. I am Darian Aaron, your moderator and Senior Director of Local News U.S. South at GLAAD, the world's largest LGBTQ media advocacy organization. Tonight's discussion is conducted in partnership with E3 Radio and journalist Anna Deshawn, host of the Queer News podcast. Audio will be recorded tonight for an upcoming episode of Queer News. This gathering is not intended to be a lecture, a panel discussion, or a moment when it is young versus old, but rather a mutual exchange of ideas where knowledge and life experiences converge. This is a safe space where we listen, learn, and most of all, honor and respect our differences. There are 3 generations of people in the room tonight: Boomers, Gen X, and Gen Z, all of whom have different experiences and levels of knowledge as it pertains to HIV. According to recent GLAAD research, only 31% of Gen Zers say they feel knowledgeable about HIV, which is far behind previous generations. And 44% of Americans say they disagree with the scientific fact that undetectable equals untransmittable. So while scientific advancements have allowed HIV to become a chronic, manageable condition, HIV is far from being over in Black communities. So let's start here. I'm curious to hear from the young people in the room about the HIV education you've received. What do you know about HIV, and do you feel you have the necessary information to protect your sexual health? What do you know about HIV, and do you feel you have the necessary information to protect your sexual health?
Hi, I'm Marissa. I am 15 and I go by she, her. I want to start off by saying that my education mostly and mainly comes from my mother as she lives with HIV. Other than that, the education I've received from school and anywhere else hasn't been either accurate or consistent. So the only reason I feel safe about my sexual health is because my mother has taught me how to be, but the education provided by others has not given me the actual insight of what I need to know.
Thank you for sharing. Is HIV a topic amongst your peers at school?
Honestly, unless I bring it up or they have questions about it towards me, not really, no.
So my legends, what do you think when you hear that, when you hear how HIV is no longer being discussed amongst the people who are the most vulnerable?
Hi, my name is Malcolm. I'm 68 years old, and I've been living with HIV for 30 years. A couple of things. You brought up a statistic that said 44% of people don't believe that the science of U equals U. But yet, having grown up through the 80s and 90s, understanding what HIV was and how the community, well, I'll say the gay community was aware and trying to get that message to our brothers and sisters in the straight community, I'm rather surprised that young people are still not talking about it, but yet, I'm conflicted. So I'm going to say that. I'm conflicted because I hear I hear stigma, right? But yet I hear people thinking that HIV is over, right? So it's like, there's so many things going on, and I guess that just speaks to the availability of information sources, whether they're right or wrong. Everybody gets their information. Everybody has their information in their pocket, and whatever they choose to listen to. So, but it's just interesting to me that young people are not even talking about HIV.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but like I said, I'm conflicted. It's interesting because I would think that when you hear the stigma, as a gay man, I still hear young gay men, oh, he got the bug, and all the things, right? We still hear that, but yet we find out that maybe the younger generation is not really talking about it as much, or if they're talking about it, maybe it's just along those stigma lines.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on something that you mentioned. It was actually a question that I had for later in the conversation, but I think now is the perfect time to bring it up around language. If anybody's on dating apps, you always see folks say in their profile, I'm clean, when they're talking about their HIV status. But we know as advocates that it's really important to use people first language when you're talking about HIV and you're talking about status. Talk to me about the role language plays in decreasing stigma.
Hello, my name is Reagan. I'm 27. She, her. I don't know. I don't know if I'm Gen Z or millennial. I feel like I'm on the cusp. I'm on the edge.
How old are you?
I'm 27.
Okay.
I think I'm thinking back into my experience in grade school. I remember there was a big push in middle school to talk about HIV. I'm a history nerd, specifically a Black history nerd. So anything to do with Black people, I like to dig deep. So understanding how HIV affects the Black community, especially the queer community, is something that I'm very invested in. I think one of the things I see is that because of the language around HIV, it being related to people who are queer, people think it doesn't affect them, and I think that's where it becomes dangerous. So it's not talked about because we treat queerness within our community as if it's invisible or has to do with someone else, when in fact it has to do with everybody. So even with regards to casual sex, I personally don't engage in casual sex, but it's not something that's talked about as much, even though it's something that we should talk about, because people concern themselves with certain STDs and STIs, but we don't consider our health because there is a stigma behind it. So the language behind it, I think, really affects people even talking about safe sex with their children. Like, I know for me, as a cis straight woman, I think the biggest concern is like getting pregnant, but there's bigger things outside of just pregnancy when it comes to sex and sexuality. So, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned was this disconnect between the younger generation and the older generation. I'm hoping that our legends can speak to what it was like in the early days of the HIV crisis and how that impacted your lives, your friendships, because I think folks that are Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they really don't understand what it was like in the 80s and the 90s. So can you give us some context?
My name is Darlene Hudson, and I just go by y'all. And wow, I just was thinking back to your response, the young lady here, and I just was like, whoa, it's amazing. It's so unreal that we're at this state now that our schools, our churches, I don't know about everybody's church and I don't know about everybody's school, but across the board are not continuing the educational efforts that we continued. Just a little bit of history. I lived in Arkansas, and nothing was being done with black gays, period. Nothing. And I worked for the Arkansas Department of Health. And I started an organization called Brothers and Sisters, and it was just amazing the lack of information that was being shared. And to talk about impact, I watched so many people die from shame, from shame, from shame, don't want nobody to know, secrecy, and participating in the spread. They take a risk when they lay down with anybody. And there's truth in that. But there's also about accountability and responsibility. So it was devastating. If you can imagine, I'm thinking about a church in particular in Arkansas, and the whole tenor section vanished. And in the tenor section, there must have been at least, I would be willing to say 20, 25 men. And majority of them, with an exception of one or two, they were all gay. And I always wondered, how did this pastor funeralize one after the other? A whole tenor section disappears, dies, they die alone. So it was very impacting. And, those were some of my early experiences. But I'm just kind of taken back that the continuation, the urgency around the educating piece is not still happening. Now that part I'm just not getting, because I see on my timeline, I see young men still dying from HIV. And people, we get older, some are dying from diabetes and cancer, but I see so many young men in their 20s, 28s, and 30s, and I'm like, how did we miss that, giving out that information? And I did work here with Sister Love, worked very hard around black women, and I know that there's still efforts happening, but that disconnect with the school, I think that that's something that should be, the bell need to be rang, and rang loudly, so that people will know we still need to have a responsibility to teach that. And it should not be in the context of queer people. It should be in the context of your sexual health. Mm-hmm. And what is that going to look like? And not only just HIV, any of the, we used to call them VD, but STIs and all of that, that's just how far I go back. It was a VD, you had the VD. And they, same kind of foolishness, people just going out and spreading. Some intentionally, some didn't care. But yeah, it was very impacting. I lost so many friends. I can't even start to even count them. I can think about the top rated ones, but I saw so many. There was one young man who was transgender. Back in the day, we didn't call them transgender, we called them drag queens. and they wore that title very proudly. And but he died alone. Didn't want nobody to know. His family shunned anybody from our community coming to the funeral, having anything to say. They dressed that dude in a suit, funeralized him, did not acknowledge any of his contribution. And so what we did is we launched an event that I watched grow from 50 to over 500 in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's significant. And we call it the Swiss Smoker Picnic because that was Swiss Smoker name. I can't even hardly think of what Swiss Smoker real name is. But it was, and we launched that, and that became another mechanism, a vehicle for educating people, because in the park, we did testing, we gave condoms, we had people do assessments, and anything they got wrong, we educated them on the correct way. So I'm just like, what the correct information is. So I'm just kind of taken back with it, but I want you guys to know this was not anything passive. This was very active. A lot of death and dying, As I told you, I work for the health department. I'm turning this mic back over and just simply say that watching the surveillance information come through, and I just kept saying, we got to do something. I wasn't even gay. How about that part? Oh, I am now, but I wasn't then. I was working for the health department, but I recognized these people were my friends. Mm-hmm. And my best Judy, Mr. Alfred Jarrett, said to me, if you really want to have an impact, come go with me. And to the gay club I went, and the rest of it is history. I'm here now, so. But yeah, it was very, very hard on our communities. And people it was a sad time. And my time with it probably was in the early 90s. I answered calls on the phone. Can I get it by mosquitoes? I was on the hotline. So I think that I've been around since the beginning. And so it was very, very impacting.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Darlene. Because GLAAD is a media advocacy organization, I think back to the images that I saw of people living with HIV in the early 90s. And all of those images and those stories have seemed to disappear from media. So I wonder, from the young folks over here, are you seeing people living with HIV in media anywhere, whether that be online, on YouTube, on Instagram? Because I know that is a way that people are being introduced to people living with HIV and being educated about the virus, at least in my day. That's how we got some education. I remember Pedro Zamora from The Real World was like my first glimpse into the life of someone living with HIV. Is that the same for you? Can you name any character or person, real person living with HIV?
I personally I'm not. I'm able to name many people that I know myself living with HIV, but I don't know any characters or social media people. I'm pretty sure some of my friends may know characters from like shows, but that's mostly just from Stigma.
Hi, I'm Malachi Traylor. I am 22 years old, and my pronouns is he, him. And I would say on the media, not that anyone that I watch have disclosed this information living with HIV or AIDS, but one person I can say is my mother. She has been on the media. She is an Emmy-nominated, just hardworking woman. Her documentary Hulu series, Unexpected, and I'll just say my mother is my figure of knowing what HIV is and always will be. And it's a constant reminder that for me, just off media, through social Instagram, through YouTube, through documentaries, it helps to have a figure in your life that's actively there through childhood, through adulthood, and seeing media throughout those times, how it changed, and through commercials, how what other people are collaborating with, just knowing that the message is getting across, and throughout other actors, not so much, but having a space where that can happen definitely does put an image in my mind.
Thank you. I think this is a perfect time to actually hear from your mother. Masania Traylor, I have a question for you. Talk to us about your advocacy and the importance of being visible as a Black woman living with HIV and what that journey has been like for you.
As a Black woman living with HIV, I noticed early on, from the very beginning of my diagnosis, that I was convinced that I'm not the only one, and that if I have it, y'all got a problem on your hands. Because what was being taught in school was that you had to be a part of certain behaviors in order to contract HIV. And being someone who researches things down to an anthill and how it is built from tiny pieces of red dirt type person, when I looked at like where I graduated high school and where I went to get a used tire when I caught my flat tire on my first car, or where I got my first job working at the mall, and just really sitting with where I hung out, the people I was with, and what their behaviors were, I was like thinking, how in the world did I get HIV? And you mean to tell me none of the people around me got it? Like, nah. So I wasn't convinced, and so I started speaking up about it. And the more I spoke up, the more whispers I heard. I got a lot of whispers, thousands over the years, from the teachers when I would go speak in the schools, to the kids that would say, I just lost my mom, or I just lost my aunt, my favorite uncle, my best friend has it, to sometimes the PE coaches would come and disclose. Sometimes the custodians would come and disclose. Sometimes people would come and disclose because they didn't have anyone to get support or know how to support a loved one. And oftentimes people would just tell me that they lost someone. And so then I had to start dealing with like the conversation around mortality. Like, just because I'm sharing doesn't mean I want to keep hearing, oh, someone died. So it's like every time you tell me someone died, you're telling me I'm gonna die. So the internalizing pieces around mortality and the stigma around HIV, like just being disgusted with self. I understood very swiftly that where you work, play, live is where you're gonna date, where you're gonna go out, where you may end up having your sexual encounters with individuals. So just where I lived put me at a higher risk of contracting an HIV diagnosis. If I had lived in Seattle, Washington, the likeliness would have been like slim to nothing. At the time, I had also been transitioning, working in the pharmacy. I had been a pharmacy technician for about 4 years, stopped, became a hairstylist, natural hairstylist, and then went back into the pharmacy when I was about 5 months pregnant with my daughter. Once I decided to start speaking up more about it, just based off like if the way in which health communications and the narrative is being put out there, still to this moment, I believe that the messaging would not have prevented me from contracting HIV to this day. Whether it be PrEP, U equals U, the conversations that are mostly like highlighted in the media are not things that I know would prevent my children from contracting HIV. Like, they have to have their own reason for why they want to stay HIV negative, because in their life, it's a norm. So what's the big deal? If I get it, I'll be okay. You know, or if they wanted to date someone living with HIV. So how do I help them have the fear of, I don't want anything, but also if I decide to date someone, I'm equipped and educated enough not to be cruel or mean, and I can be compassionate about it and supportive and educated. So
do you think some of the blame should be directed at pharmaceutical companies who have not been targeting Black women in terms of marketing?
Absolutely. I typically I don't speak about pharmaceutical companies.
We're not going to name them.
I get that, but being having been a pharmacy technician, that most times people don't know that has been my profession prior to doing HIV advocacy work full time. Even with the consideration of becoming a pharmacist, when I really looked at what was different between me with my white coat on versus the person coming to pick up their prescription, there was no difference. And the way that I would disclose is by writing on a receipt saying, hey, I take the same medications as you. And that's how I would build relationships with patients that were taking HIV meds. I think that entities that have enough money to really look at the messaging they really did miss the mark, because over the years, historically, when you look at GRID, you're not necessarily looking at who was in office to make the decision to call it GRID. There weren't black and brown people in political offices to make that decision, let alone the people that were having the conversations with those political officials at the time were white gay men, because they had the privilege to say, hey, you're my cousin. My cousin knows you. The access was there, and it wasn't black and brown people. So generationally, the market was going to be missed for black people in general because of where it started. There was not going to be a primary focus on us until decades later.
Yeah. I want to talk about access for a second. Access to testing, access to PrEP. Are you guys informed about PrEP, what it is, and how it can be an essential tool to keep you safe? Yes, okay, that's good to know. Because a lot of people still don't know.
She, her pronouns, and I'm 20. From my understanding, PrEP is a pre-exposure prophylaxis. So you take it before, I think you take it routinely before exposure. And then you have PEP, which you would take post-exposure. And then you have DoxyPEP, which you would take for other STIs.
That is absolutely correct. Yes, give it up. That makes me feel so good.
I want to ask another question. Where did you learn that?
I would not know that information unless I worked within the sexual health field and had that desire to pursue that dream further. If I was one of my peers that didn't know me, I would have no clue.
Wow. How do you guys think we can bridge the divide? Because there's clearly a knowledge gap between the generations. Yeah.
I would say that I wouldn't even say the older generation has more knowledge either. I will argue that if I were to pull my mom and my aunts and my dad and ask them the same question, they'd be like, Wow. Because truly, I think that when it comes to talking to black women, this is more of a cultural criticism where I think we have to deal with some of the stigmatizations of sexuality within our own community, because that's kind of what's behind us not dealing with stuff. I think even now, as we see ourselves entering more of a sexual liberation, we still don't talk about sexual health. I mean, I don't want to talk about certain artists and whatnot, but we can talk about STIs and STDs so casually, but not in the sense of sexual health. More of oh yeah, I got that, it's whatever, but not kind of talking about it more in depth. And even, again, we talk about queerness. When you have this mindset that, HIV is only something that gay people get, you're not thinking to be wise about your sexual health. If you also, when it comes to dying in shame, it's almost as if when you share what you're going through, it's a justification for whatever reason, which makes no sense to me. So it comes to a place where we as a community have to deal with some of our inherent biases so we can have a bigger conversation, because it becomes detrimental to ourselves. So even in that, we're not going to talk about our sexual health and wellness until we talk about, the truth. That's why, like I said, I'm a Black history nerd. So as much as I love Black history, I criticize Black culture in the sense that we have to deal with some of our inherent biases so we can focus on our health a little bit more. So if we don't deal with some of our homophobia within our own community, or even misogyny in our own community, we can't prioritize our health either, because we kind of be like, oh, I don't think that's a problem for me. It's not my issue. Because I guarantee if I ask some of my aunts who are older than me about it, they'd be like, I have an uncle who lives with HIV, and to them, they don't talk about it, but it's kind of oh, well, it's because he's gay. And I'm like, well, that's not it's a big conversation.
So I want to address the thing that you left me out of your generational piece, because I am a millennial, solid millennial. So I'm always sandwiched in. I don't know if y'all want to put me on the lettuce or the meat or the cheese, but I'm always sandwiched in when it comes to conversations.
I did forget about the millennials. That wasn't intentional.
No, it's okay.
I'm glad you're here.
But yeah, here's the thing. I'm also a millennial mom that gave birth to Generation Z, but I had my first child as a teenager, my senior year of high school. So when I look at the history of HIV, it's not being told. It's not being shown. There, and we are so focused on destigmatizing it. If you have no fear, then what is there to care about? for a lot of people. And so even sitting next to this beautiful person here, when they're shared that they lost many people, what does many look like? Because my children cannot, I don't see them materializing it because I don't share this or talk about it much because it's so heavy. But, you know, one of your favorite people, you know, I'm going to say Auntie Kim Kim, right? She lost not only her mother and her father, and I don't think you all know this, she lost her mother and her father to complications of AIDS, right? And she stopped counting at 50. She went to 50 funerals before she turned 25 years old of people who were living with an HIV or AIDS diagnosis simply because she was born with an HIV diagnosis. And what did they decide to do then? Oh, all you little people over here, we feel so sorry for you. Go play with the other kids living with HIV too before you all die. And then to be a lifetime survivor and outlive not only your parents, but the people that you dreamed to say, I'm gonna be the godmother of your child. You dream to say, we're gonna have kids one day. Oh my God, you had a kid? Is the baby has HIV, Kim? And the baby doesn't. It's like, oh my God, now I can too. And then you die the next year before you're 25. And so that right there is not something that is being showcased or even a narrative that's being told when it comes to lifetime survivors or dandelions, because people were so focused on the adults. So me as a parent, I get grandparents, I get parents, and I get youth that I'm speaking to, and that intergenerational conversation around like reproductive health and sex. The parents are typically 5 to 10, sometimes 15 years older than me because I'm a young mom. And they haven't had that conversation with their kids because they're uncomfortable. But then I'm now having a conversation educating them in real time.
Wow.
And then I'm coming to educate their children as well. And then I'm coming to educate the grandchildren. Now this right here real quick will maybe behoove you some. I met someone where not only did they have an HIV diagnosis, their mother did not, but their grandmother did, and their great-grandmother did. Not from the same person. Exactly. So then, more recently, I had someone who was referred to me by a provider where not only did she find out that she had HIV while she was pregnant, she wasn't able to stay in care for having sex being Black and having sex equals poverty to me. That's like the outcome of it. That's how I've been experiencing it. With this young lady, not only did she birth an HIV positive child, she was breastfeeding at the time, her toddler, and transmitted HIV to her toddler via breast milk. And my first question was, what does dad need? Because then he's automatically either running from the stigma of just a Black man being in care around his health. So it's not a matter of focusing just only on women or only on youth. If we focus on what the real word community means, it would be to focus on neighborhoods. Where you work, play, lay your head, all of that. Focus on a neighborhood. A neighborhood is truly the foundational piece of what a community is. And that's not something that pharmaceutical companies do, academia. It is so large scale that it's not micro-focused in because there's so much money being made off of it. Why do it that way? That makes too much sense.
Thank you for sharing, Ms. Sonia. Of course, I was coming to you next, actually, because I saw your face.
So I'm Jay, the gentleman. I am, my pronouns are he, him, and I am 40. So I'm squarely in the millennial as well. But also, I'm super gay. Like, I'm gay. Like, deep down in my undercarriage, I'm gay. And my experience is very different than what we've been talking about here because there is not an app you can log on to. There is not a gay club you can go to. There is not a gay space you can exist in where HIV is not front and center. There are condoms in the bathroom. There is a drop down for your HIV status on almost every app that you can think of. HIV is so ubiquitous in our culture, not just disease, but conversation about it, that my experience is very different than y'all. I was on the apps earlier today having conversations about, now granted enough, he said if I'm clean or not, but that's a conversation for a different day. One thing that I know, because I also am sandwiched in between those who grew up in the 80s, who came of age in the 80s and the 90s, and then me in the very early 2000s, my experience is that I did witness people dying. I didn't go to 50, but I definitely went to 30 plus funerals of clients and friends that passed away from complications surrounding HIV and AIDS. But also, I was of the generation that came of age when PrEP became widely available, when HIV meds went from multiple pills a day and cocktails to one pill a day, where undetectable did become untransmittable. And so my experience as a gay man who was as a black gay man in the South, who's targeted by all of these efforts, is the ubiquity of conversation about HIV. And also, I market a tremendous success that you are 15 years old and your circle of friends can look to you for questions about HIV because your mama is living with it. That is, when I was an HIV educator in high schools, that was unheard of. The idea that my peer, somebody who walks and talks and is my same age and looks like me, and I go to a fifth period or whatever with her, I can go to and be like, hey girl, I got a question. And you might not have every answer, but the idea that you have any answers is what we worked for generations to get to. So I think that it's a yes and kind of problem that we're dealing with. Because I also acknowledge that for people who are not black and gay, like I am in the South, that HIV is very much their problem over there. But for us, HIV is very much so sitting right here in this chair next to me, and I have to deal with it every single day of my life if I want to have any level of sexual activity or any level of I can't go to a pride celebration without HIV testing. I can't go to a club without condoms in the bathroom. I can't go to all these things. And that to me is a success, but it creates all the gaps that everybody else's experience falls into. That I have such an intimate relationship with HIV as someone not living with it, but then we have people that are across the aisle or across the generational line or across the gender line or across the sexuality line that have such a different experience. So I just wanted to drop that in there.
It's not that my children have access to someone living with HIV. Many people have access. Many children have access to someone living with HIV. The other young lady just spoke about it earlier, saying her uncle. My children have a mother who is openly living with an HIV diagnosis, publicly scrutinized by HIV and AIDS. Whichever people choose to utilize, I lean into both, regardless of where the diagnosis lies because of the stigma. So it lands differently because I intentionally wanted to ensure that what I'm doing I know can create harm for my family. I made my family aware that, hey, I'm going to start being public about my status. You need to figure out how you're going to respond because people are not going to be nice. So I have many peers that have children and they are living with HIV. I have many friends now because of my diagnosis that are living with HIV. They will never be open and they have no intention or desire to ever disclose to their children whatsoever, because why do I need to tell them? So I think that even though it is a success and it's a yes and, there's a certain level of understanding that came to me that was so intentional that you went to over 30 plus funerals, and I think I've only been to one, maybe two, and one of which was Hydea Broadbent, and I flew to Las Vegas for that one. And another one is Mary Bowman and Danielle Creighton, and that's within the last 5 years. I've not had to have that experience, but all I needed was one within the first year of my diagnosis to hear that somebody I went to elementary school and high school with had passed away from complications of HIV because he was not openly gay and wanted to be, was a Jehovah's Witness, and that he was told that this would be his punishment. That is what made me say, oh my God, if he knew that me as a heterosexual woman, pregnant, living with HIV, maybe he would still be living today. Because I know what it was like to go without meds for long periods of time because I just didn't want to take the medicine. And I didn't want to be alive. I didn't want to have to face any scrutiny with my children disclosing to them or any of that. So I had a heavy amount of shame, but it took one black gay man to pass away for me to say, oh, y'all need to do something. You gone to over 30 and my other friend has gone to over 50.
No, I have. I've been to over, I've just went to just trying to count. I've been to over 100 funerals between Arkansas and Georgia. Yeah, well, much.
I want to jump in.
I didn't go to, I still knew, so whatever reason.
I want to jump in here because a lot has changed since 80s and the 90s, when it was a very bleak period for us, for people living with HIV and for people who loved these folks who passed away. We now have antiretroviral drugs that changed the game. People are living longer. They're living healthy lives with HIV. So can we talk about the significance of those advancements and how they've prolonged the lives of people living with HIV? I also want to talk about the stigma surrounding PrEP, because PrEP is an effective tool against acquiring the virus. It's 99% effective against acquiring HIV through sex. So let's talk about the advancements and talk about how we can get people on PrEP who are not living with HIV.
So I don't want to talk about, I'm not talking about PrEP. I want to talk about living with HIV for 30 years and considering myself blessed looking back, because the funerals that I went to, because the people that I knew living with HIV who I watched them take their meds, and some were in the refrigerator and some were not, and some you had to take with food and some not. And just the regimen of not being able to go to work, not because you were sick, but you couldn't go to work because you couldn't possibly take all of your medicine while you were at work. And so why I consider myself blessed, because I was diagnosed in 1997, and it was the beginning of 2-pill regimens, 3-pill regimens, right? And even though they had some horrible side effects, this is my husband right here, we go on vacation and we're both living with HIV, and we take our medicine, and then we take our medicine at breakfast and then run back to the hotel room while we were on our vacation to see who was going to have to go to the bathroom first. Which was real. I mean, that was real, right? You know, virus that went through you faster than a speeding cup of coffee, okay? But as we progressed in our life together and in, you know, in our journey with HIV, kept in touch with our doctors, and we were blessed to have some very good doctors who, the minute something else came out, genotype, make sure, can you take this medicine? And so we've been fortunate in that, you know, in taking our meds. But the other thing is that we can't lose sight of, I don't know where else you're doing this in the South, right? But we cannot lose sight of the bubble that exists around Atlanta, Georgia, right? Because if you lived in LaGrange, life would be different, right? If you lived in Macon, if you lived in some little town, there's a y'all gonna laugh, but there's a town in Georgia called The Rock, and a joke about it is that as you're driving into the town, you look at the sign and it says you are entering The Rock, and as you turn your head as you pass, it says you are leaving The Rock. All right? So if you live in one of those small towns where everybody knows everybody, where your mama's best friend works at the post office, where you can't get your medication because as soon as that pill comes in, that package comes in, you know, everybody in town knows your business. You know, life is very, very different. And when we talk about how we are living with HIV and we're dealing with stigma, you ain't seen stigma. You know, living in Atlanta, and like you said, in every gay club, you know, on the apps, whatever, we can have conversations about it. But, you know, when you still back in that 1980, oh Lord, don't know nobody tell me them. I mean, life is very different. So we have to, I want to acknowledge that and make sure that people are aware that the issues of HIV are not just about those of us living here, but they're living in rural areas where they don't have support and where they can't get the, and where they are deathly afraid to tell somebody what's going on with them. And that's real.
Thank you for that. Jay, I'm hoping that you can speak to the PrEP piece quickly.
Yes. I have a story about PrEP. So I dated someone when in my 20s, and he was living with HIV and I was not. And he told me that he didn't, this was when PrEP was new. The first PrEP therapies were out on the market. He said he didn't want to have the responsibility of my HIV status as his sole responsibility. And he also worked at an organization. He navigated PrEP with me. He made sure I got on and I had an appointment, all the things. But that was back when I was living in Dallas, Texas, and no one prescribed PrEP in Dallas. So I had to drive 3.5 hours to Houston to get it twice a month because I had to go down for my labs and then go down to pick up my meds and then come back home and all the things. And that was one time in my HIV journey, that I realized how difficult it was. But the connective tissue between that was he was on a one-a-day med as someone living with HIV, and I was on a one-a-day med as someone not living with HIV. And for the first time, he told me that he felt normal in a relationship, that we had a shared experience around preventing HIV. It was the same thing. We took our pills at the same time with all the things, similar to how you said with your husband, but it was, across the zero continuum. Mm-hmm. Since then, I've been on PrEP for almost 15 years now, so I've gone from one-a-day pills to, injections, and I will never, ever go back to pills as best I can. But what I realized was my circle of support were all primarily on a one-a-day therapy. And so when all of them started shifting to injections, I realized that I was missing doses left and right because, we didn't have the same text messages, or the group chat wasn't popping off every day, be like, hey, did y'all take your pills? And so I made the decision to switch to injections because I knew that if I was inconsistently using PrEP, inconsistently taking my meds, who knows what could have happened. But what I realized, and once one of my friends who was living with HIV who switched to injections very early on, he was in a trial. He was in a trial, and he said for the first time in his life, he started to feel normal again because he didn't have this daily reminder that he's sick, or that he had made a bad decision, or he was not as educated as he could have been. It felt like his life kind of opened up and it started to breathe again. And he didn't realize the cloud that medical regimen had over his life, even though it was keeping him healthy, keeping him alive and well and thriving. He still didn't realize the remnants of shame that he was carrying until he didn't have that daily reminder. And now I don't have that same experience because I'm not living with HIV, but it was life-changing for him because he started to feel normal again.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to begin to wrap us up, but before we go, I do want to acknowledge my colleague Jerrell Hardnett, who's in the room. He's actually the author of GLAAD's new HIV Stigma Report, and I'm just going to have him say a few words. Just give us your major takeaways from writing the report.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jerrell Hardnett. My pronouns are he, him. One of my biggest takeaways from the report, or some of my findings, is information is everywhere, understanding is not. That's the thing that I have come to find when I was working on this report for about 3.5 months. And what kind of fuels some of this stuff is we have these chat box, we have these language model tools that are fueling education for the younger generation. When I had a couple conversations with my niece will be on her way to college next week. She is now the sweet age of 18. And for myself, I'm someone who's been living with HIV for 10 plus years. And her way of identifying and figuring more stuff out about that was because she used GLAAD, ChatGPT, to inform her about my own status and things of that nature. The only thing that was just unfortunate for her, when she tried to do more research about me, her uncle, she asked the question, well, what are you taking? And the thing is, for me, now I'm a unique unicorn, and Jay, you know this as well. I'm an elite controller. And so as an elite controller for 10 plus years, I've never taken any medication for my HIV. I've always been virally suppressed. There's only 10% of the human population who actually do not have to take any medication. And so I am someone who's blessed to be in that space. But the thing is, I use that as an opportunity to say that we have to have more conversations. And when funding is being pulled right now for people not to have these conversations, then we have a bigger problem. And it starts to balloon even more to where we're not having these conversations one-on-one with one another. And so my goal from this report is to start breaking down these spaces and start having these more conversations, pulling away from these criminalization laws that people do not understand. You know this very well. I'm from Arkansas as well, Pine Bluff specifically. Even in the state of Arkansas, if you spit on someone, you can still be criminalized just for that. And I'm thinking to myself, child, let me not eat from no one else's plate. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, we need to be more informed about these, and we have to start breaking these silos and have these conversations with those who are in official powers to understand what we can do to start supporting and building back into the community. And what you said, if we're going to get into community, then we need to really have these conversations about, are we really going to go into these cities, into these streets to have these deep conversations that need to be had? Or are we going to keep on capitalizing off of the word community so you can bring more money into these spaces? What is that going to be for you? Where's the line drawn at? But overall, once again, this report will be coming out very soon. Can I say the date? Oh yeah, this report will be coming out on August the 20th. I'm really excited for everyone to really just lean into it, learn, understand, and draw from their own understanding of what this can be for how you can use this as a tool for yourself to champion conversation with Generation Z, for us as millennials, Gen X, baby boomers on up, but how are we challenging Hollywood to show more stories, a lack of visibility, showing people who are living with HIV, who live everyday lives? Because once again, I don't think about my HIV stats every day. I think about, for me, I'm in an active fraternity at Kappa Alpha Psi. Baby, I'm out there strolling all day, every day. I'm out there having a good time with my friends. I'm out there twerking 24/7. But I am living a full, robust life. And I want people to understand and see stories of it, not stories that came back from 1970s, 1980s, but we're actually having conversations about what does it look like for me to be in conversation with family? What does it look like to me to have intimacy at this age? And so that's my kind of overall. There'll be more conversations about this, but once again, thank you all so very much for taking the time to be in this space to offer your thoughts, your ideas, and share with myself and Darian. And I have to give another round of applause to our great Darian for putting this together. Let's please give him a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Jerrell, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight and opening up and sharing your experiences with us and the listeners. GLAAD's 6th annual HIV Stigma Report will be released this Thursday, August 20th. You can log on to GLAAD.org to read the full report. Thank you. Thank y'all. That was wonderful.
If you've enjoyed what you heard, rate and review us inside your favorite podcasting app. Queer News is brought to you by E3 Radio and distributed on theCUBE. We are Queer News done right.